You want to go deep on hurricanes?
Yeah.
And wow, after Hurricane Milton,
Mm.
it's definitely on everyone's mind now.
Right.
85 billion in damage.
Yeah.
35 lives lost. It's just
It's a lot.
staggering.
It really puts it in perspective about how powerful these storms are
Absolutely.
and how important it is to understand them.
So to grasp the magnitude of what we're dealing with, I thought we could jump back in time
Okay.
over a century
Wow.
to 1900
Okay.
and look at the deadliest hurricane in U.S. history,
Okay.
the 1900 Galveston Hurricane.
The Galveston Hurricane is so compelling because it wasn't just about the storm's intensity.
Okay.
Human choices played a significant role in the scale of the tragedy.
Choices or miscalculations.
Yeah, miscalculation.
And that's where Eric Larson's book, Isaac Storm, comes in, right?
Exactly.
Gives us a window into the events leading up to the hurricane through the eyes of Isaac Klein,
Yeah.
the Galveston Weather Bureau chief.
The Klein story is fascinating
Yeah.
because it highlights how even the experts can be caught off guard.
Especially when facing something so unprecedented.
Especially when facing something so unprecedented. Exactly.
Okay, so paint a picture for me.
Okay.
What was Galveston like in 1900?
Imagine a bustling port city
Okay.
on a barrier island,
Okay.
rivaling Houston in its economic power.
Wow.
Galveston was a gem of the Gulf Coast.
Really?
Beautiful beaches,
Okay.
thriving economy,
Mm-hmm.
and a sense of almost invincibility.
Invincible against hurricanes.
There was this widespread belief that Galveston was immune to serious hurricane damage.
No way.
Part of it was the island's geography,
Okay.
and part of it was Isaac Klein himself.
Well, really?
In 1891, he wrote an article that basically dismissed the threat of a major hurricane
Oh, wow.
hitting Galveston.
He said that.
He cited its location, the
Yeah.
laws of storm movement.
Huh.
It's almost as if he jinxed the whole city.
Wow, so this wasn't just some random idea. This
Yeah.
was a respected expert's opinion that everyone took as gospel.
Mm-hmm.
No wonder they weren't prepared.
And this belief in Galveston's immunity really contributed to that lack of preparedness.
Yeah.
People weren't even considering the possibility.
Of a major hurricane.
Right.
But there must have been some warning signs, right?
Oh, yes, there were.
Like what?
They were subtle,
Okay.
almost eerie,
Uh-huh.
and easy to overlook.
Okay.
Days before the Hurricane Klein observed these slow, powerful swells in the Gulf,
Really?
he was puzzled by them. It wasn't something he'd witnessed before a storm.
So even he was sensing something unusual,
Yeah,
even with that preconceived notion that Galveston was safe.
exactly.
Wow.
And residents reported oppressive heat and a strange heaviness in the air. You know, like when you just feel a storm brewing,
Yeah.
but magnified tenfold. It was like the atmosphere itself was holding its breath.
Okay, so you've got these unsettling signs.
Yeah,
But what about communication?
right.
I mean, this is the early 1900s. How were they getting information about this storm?
The U.S. Weather Bureau was still in its infancy,
Okay.
and there was this tension between centralized control
Okay.
under Willis Moore, the Bureau's head,
Mm-hmm.
and the observations of local experts like Isaac Klein.
So you've got Klein on the ground in Galveston seeing these weird signs.
Yes,
But the Weather Bureau headquarters is calling the shots.
exactly.
Wow.
And to make matters worse, the Bureau was focused on a different storm
Oh, really?
that had just hit Florida.
Okay.
They were convinced that that was the main event. And they downplayed reports coming in from Cuba.
Cuba.
Yeah.
What do they have to do with it?
Well, Cuban meteorologists at the time were actually quite advanced in hurricane detection.
Oh, wow.
They were sending warnings about a major storm brewing in the Gulf,
Ah.
but Willis Moore, in his quest for control,
Yeah.
basically dismissed them.
So wait, there were actual warnings coming in?
Yes,
And they were ignored
they were.
because of one guy wanting to be in charge.
It sounds crazy, right?
It does.
But that's exactly what happened.
Wow.
This clash between centralized authority and local knowledge,
Yeah.
it's a theme that unfortunately repeats itself throughout history,
Especially in disaster situations.
especially in disaster situations, yeah.
So Klein's on the ground.
Yeah.
The Weather Bureau is downplaying the risk.
Right.
What about the people in Galveston?
Yeah.
Were they getting any information?
What's chilling is that even as this storm was brewing in the Gulf,
Yeah.
the Galveston newspaper published an article
Uh-huh.
stating that Saturday would be fair with fresh, possibly brisk northerly winds.
Hold on. So they're telling people to expect a breezy Saturday
Yeah.
while a hurricane is bearing down on them.
It really underscores how dangerous it can be to rely on a single source of information,
Right.
especially one that's downplaying the risks.
And what about Isaac Klein?
Yeah.
He's seeing these signs.
Right.
But he also wrote that article years ago saying Galveston was safe.
Yeah.
What was going through his mind?
You can almost feel his internal struggle in Larson's book.
Yeah.
On one hand, he's observing the rising tides, the unusual winds.
Okay.
On the other hand, he's clinging to that earlier belief,
Right.
the one that made him famous,
Yeah.
that Galveston was somehow protected.
So he's got this dilemma.
Mm-hmm.
But what did he actually do?
Yeah.
Did he warn anyone?
There are accounts of him warning some individuals
Okay.
about potential flooding,
Mhm.
but then downplaying the threat to others.
Wow.
Imagine the internal conflict,
Yeah.
the uncertainty he must have been experiencing.
It's like he was trapped between what he was seeing and what he had always believed.
Yeah.
Tragic, really.
Tragic.
But then the hurricane actually hits.
Right.
What happened?
It made landfall on September 8th as a Category 4 hurricane.
Wow.
Now remember, this is 1900.
Okay.
Building codes were different.
Yeah.
Forecasting was in its infancy.
Right.
Category 4 then was devastating.
Yeah.
Even more so than 1 today.
Okay, so set the scene for me. Okay. What was it like when the storm hit?
Imagine a wall of water, 15 to 20 feet high.
15 feet of water.
Yeah.
My house is only 1 story.
Crashing over the island.
That's terrifying.
Galveston was only about 8 feet above sea level.
Wow.
At its highest point.
Oh my gosh.
So the storm surge essentially swallowed the entire city.
Wow, 15 feet of water.
Uh-huh.
What happened to the people?
It was chaos.
Yeah?
Complete and utter chaos.
Oh my gosh.
Houses were ripped apart.
Yeah.
Debris was flying everywhere.
I can imagine.
Survivors described being swept away by the current,
Oh wow.
clinging to whatever they could find,
Yeah.
just trying to stay above the water.
This is just horrific.
It was
I can't even imagine.
it was a terrifying scene.
And what about Isaac Klein?
Yeah.
What happened to him and his family during the hurricane?
Well, it's where Larson's book really gets into the human cost of this disaster.
Okay.
Klein's house was struck by a massive piece of debris,
Oh my gosh.
and he was separated from his family. He describes being swept away,
Oh wow.
clinging to wreckage,
Yeah.
desperately searching for his wife and daughters.
Oh my gosh. It's just heartbreaking just
Yeah.
thinking about what he must have gone through.
It was a night of unimaginable terror and loss.
It was.
As we delve deeper into the events of that night,
Okay.
it becomes even more apparent that the Galveston hurricane wasn't just a natural disaster.
Right.
It was a confluence of factors,
Yeah.
including some critical human errors that magnified its impact.
That's what really gets me about this whole story.
Mm.
You've got these warning signs.
Right.
You've got experts. And yet
Yeah.
thousands of people still lost their lives.
I know. It's hard to believe.
What went wrong?
Well, let's go back to those conflicting reports we talked about.
Okay.
As the storm was intensifying in the Gulf,
Yeah.
the U.S. Weather Bureau, with its focus fixed on that Florida storm,
Right.
was effectively blind to the real danger.
Right. They dismissed those warnings from Cuba. But how were the Cuban meteorologists even tracking hurricanes back then?
They were pioneers in many ways.
Okay.
They had developed this network of observation stations
Mhm.
across the Caribbean, and they were using some pretty innovative techniques
Really?
for tracking storms. Keep in mind,
Yeah.
this is before satellites radar.
Right. All the technology we have today.
Exactly. They were relying on telegraphs,
Wow.
ship reports,
Okay.
even observing cloud formations to predict hurricane paths.
Wow. So they were actually pretty advanced.
They were, and their
Okay.
warnings were increasingly dire
Okay.
as the storm moved closer to the Gulf Coast.
Hmm.
But Willis Moore,
Right. The head of the U.S. Weather Bureau.
the head of the U.S. Weather Bureau, was so focused on maintaining control,
Yeah.
centralizing authority,
Yeah.
that he dismissed their reports.
Wow.
He believed that only the Bureau headquarters
Okay.
could issue official warnings, and he didn't trust the Cuban data.
It's like that saying, pride comes before the fall. Except in this case, the fall was catastrophic.
It is a tragic example of how ego and bureaucracy
Mm-hmm.
can get in the way of life-saving information.
Yeah.
And it's a reminder that even today, with all our technological advancements,
Right.
we still need to be vigilant about how information is shared
Absolutely.
and received, especially during emergencies.
So you've got the Weather Bureau downplaying the risk.
Uh-huh.
You've got Isaac Klein, who's supposed to be a local expert,
Yeah.
struggling with his own conflicting views.
Right.
What about the general public in Galveston?
Right.
Were they getting any sense of the danger?
Well, think about this.
Okay.
Imagine picking up your morning newspaper on the day of the hurricane
Okay.
and reading an article confidently stating
Yeah.
that the weather would be fair with fresh, possibly brisk northerly winds.
No way.
That's what the Galveston News published on September 8th, 1900.
So they were completely downplaying the threat.
They were giving a very misleading picture of what was to come.
And Klein himself contributed to that sense of security.
Who did?
He had written that article years earlier saying Galveston was safe from hurricanes.
Yeah.
Do you think he ever realized how much damage those words would cause?
It's hard to say for sure,
Yeah.
but Larson's book paints this picture of a man deeply conflicted.
Okay.
On one hand, he was witnessing these alarming signs,
Yeah.
the rising tide, the unusual wind patterns.
Right.
But on the other hand, he was grappling with his own pronouncements,
Yeah.
the very words that had made him a respected authority.
I see.
It's like he was caught in a trap of his own making.
So it's not just about the science of forecasting,
Right.
but also about human psychology.
Yeah.
How our past experiences, our beliefs,
Yeah.
can cloud our judgment, even when faced with clear and present danger.
Exactly. And it's a reminder that even experts are human,
Yeah.
susceptible to the same biases and blind spots as anyone else.
Right.
So the stage is set for disaster.
It is.
You've got this powerful hurricane brewing in the Gulf, a misinformed public,
Mm-hmm.
and even the experts are caught in this web of confusion and denial.
Right.
And then the storm hits.
It does.
Take me back to that moment. What was it like?
What was it like?
The hurricane made landfall on September 8th, 1900,
Okay.
around 6:30 p.m.
Okay.
It was a Category 4 hurricane.
Wow.
Packing winds estimated at up to 145 miles per hour.
145 miles per hour.
145 miles per hour.
That's insane.
It's hard to imagine.
What kind of damage does that kind of wind do?
Imagine buildings being ripped apart,
Okay.
trees uprooted,
Yeah.
debris flying through the air like missiles.
Oh, wow.
The wind was so powerful that it drove nails and splinters into people's bodies.
Oh, my God.
It was a scene of utter devastation.
And then there's the storm surge.
Right.
You mentioned it was 15 to 20 feet high.
Yes.
Can you even put that into perspective?
Imagine a wall of water higher than a 2-story building,
Oh,
crashing over the island, sweeping away everything in its path.
it's hard to even comprehend that kind of power.
Yeah, it's massive.
Were there any safe places in Galveston?
Virtually nowhere was safe.
Re-
The island is flat.
Yeah.
The highest point was only about 8 feet above sea level.
Right.
The storm surge inundated the entire city.
So there was literally nowhere to run,
Uh-huh.
nowhere to hide.
Nowhere to hide.
What happened to the people who couldn't escape?
The descriptions from survivors are harrowing.
I can imagine.
People were clinging to rooftops,
Yeah.
trees, anything they could find
Right,
to,
yeah.
to stay above the water. Families were separated.
Oh, my God.
Mothers were holding on to their children, desperately trying to keep their heads above the waves.
That's awful.
It was a nightmare come to life.
And to make matters worse, the hurricane also spawned tornadoes.
Yes, multiple tornadoes touched down
Oh, God.
in and around Galveston,
Wow.
adding another layer of terror
Yeah.
to the already catastrophic situation.
So you've got hurricane force winds,
Right.
torrential rain,
Yeah.
a devastating storm surge,
And
and tornadoes.
tornadoes.
It's like a perfect storm of destruction.
It was a truly multifaceted disaster,
Yeah.
and the human cost was unimaginable.
Yeah, it must have been.
Over 6,000 people lost their lives
6,000 people.
in the Galveston hurricane.
That number's just,
Yeah.
it's hard to even grasp the scale of the loss.
It's important to remember that each of those 6,000 people
Yeah.
had a story, a life loved ones left behind.
I know.
The impact of this hurricane reverberated through generations.
It did.
And one of those stories,
Yeah.
one that really captures the personal toll of this disaster,
Yeah.
is Isaac Klein's.
Right. What happened to him and his family during the storm?
Larson's book goes into chilling detail about Klein's experience
Okay.
as the hurricane raged.
Yeah.
A massive section of the streetcar trestle,
Okay.
weighing hundreds of tons,
Oh, my God.
was ripped loose by the storm surge
Wow.
and hurled towards Klein's house.
Oh, my God.
It slammed into the house, tearing it apart, throwing Klein, his wife Cora, and their 3 daughters into the raging water.
That's terrifying.
Klein described being swept away by the current,
Yeah.
desperately clinging to pieces of wreckage,
I can imagine.
fighting to stay alive as the storm raged around him.
Oh my gosh, I can't even imagine.
The terror, the chaos, the darkness.
And what about his family?
Yeah.
Did they survive?
Well, Klein managed to cling to a piece of debris
Okay.
and eventually make his way back to shore.
Okay.
But tragically, his wife Cora was lost in the storm.
Oh, how awful.
To survive something so horrific only to lose your wife in the chaos.
It's just heartbreaking.
It's a testament to his resilience
It is.
that he was able to survive at all, let alone save 2 of his daughters.
Wow.
But the emotional toll of that night, the loss, the guilt,
Yeah.
it must have been unimaginable.
And to think, amidst all this personal tragedy, the storm was still raging.
It was.
And the city was in ruins.
Exactly. The aftermath of the Galveston hurricane was just as devastating.
I bet.
In some ways, even more so as the reality of the scale of destruction set in.
So we'll continue this conversation and explore the aftermath of the hurricane and its lasting impact on Galveston
Sounds good.
in the next part of our deep dive. Thousands dead, a city in ruins. Where do you even begin to pick up the pieces after something like that?
It's almost unimaginable, isn't it?
Yeah.
But as we've been discussing,
Yeah.
the Galveston hurricane wasn't just a story of destruction.
Right.
It's also a story of resilience,
Okay.
of the human spirit's ability to rebuild,
Yeah.
even in the face of unimaginable loss.
And that resilience really comes through in Isaac Klein's story, doesn't it?
It does.
After losing his wife,
Yeah.
going through that harrowing experience, he still played a vital role in Galveston's recovery.
He did. And you know what's striking?
Yeah.
Is that he didn't shy away from his own role in the tragedy.
Hmm.
He acknowledged that his earlier pronouncements about Galveston's safety had contributed to the lack of preparedness. And he dedicated himself to ensuring that such a disaster would never happen again.
So he used his experience, his grief, to fuel positive change.
He did.
That's incredible.
It's a powerful story.
What were some of the specific changes that came about as a result of the Galveston hurricane?
Well, for starters, the hurricane exposed the limitations of the U.S. Weather Bureau's centralized control.
Okay.
After the storm, there's a real push to decentralize authority,
Mm-hmm.
to give local experts more autonomy in issuing warnings.
That makes sense, having someone on the ground who can see what's happening firsthand.
Exactly.
Crucial.
And the disaster also highlighted the need for better communication and coordination.
Right.
New systems were put in place to streamline the flow of information with
Okay.
the Weather Bureau, local officials, and the public.
So they learned from those communication breakdowns, those conflicting reports that contributed to the tragedy.
They did.
But what about Galveston itself?
Yeah.
How did the city recover from such catastrophic damage?
The rebuilding process was long and arduous, but the people of Galveston were determined
Okay.
to create a safer, more resilient city.
From what I've read, they went to extraordinary length.
They did. One of the most significant engineering feats
Okay.
was the construction of a massive seawall,
Wow.
over 17 feet high
Really?
and stretching for miles along the Gulf Coast.
A seawall that high. That must have been an incredible undertaking.
It was a testament to their commitment to protecting the city from future storms.
Wow.
And they didn't stop there.
What else did they do?
They also raised the elevation of the entire city.
Really?
Literally lifting houses and buildings onto higher ground.
They literally reshaped the landscape to make it safer.
They did.
That's incredible.
And they implemented stricter building codes,
All right.
requiring new structures to be more hurricane resistant.
So they took these incredibly ambitious steps to make Galveston safer.
Yeah.
But what about the impact on the city's economy and its overall identity? Did it ever fully recover from the hurricane?
Well, the hurricane had a profound impact on Galveston's trajectory.
In what way?
Before the storm, it was a major port city,
Okay.
rivaling Houston in its economic power.
Right.
But the hurricane shifted the balance of power, and Houston emerged as the dominant economic center in the region.
That makes sense. A disaster of that scale would inevitably have long-term economic consequences.
It did, and the discovery of oil at Spindlecop
Yeah?
just a few months after the hurricane further fueled Houston's growth.
So it was almost like a 1-2 punch for Galveston. First the hurricane, then the rise of Houston as an oil boom town.
In many ways, yes.
Okay.
But it's important to remember that Galveston didn't simply disappear.
Right.
It rebuilt, it adapted, and it carved out a new identity for itself.
And that new identity is deeply intertwined with the legacy of the hurricane, right?
Absolutely. The Galveston Hurricane became a defining moment in the city's history, a reminder of both its vulnerability and its resilience.
Right.
It's a story that's passed down through generations.
Wow.
A reminder of the power of nature and the importance of preparedness.
And that brings us back to the question we started with.
Okay.
Knowing what we know now about the unpredictability and power of hurricanes, how can we better prepare for these storms both individually and as communities?
Well, we can certainly learn from the mistakes that were made in Galveston. We need to heed warnings, even when they seem unlikely.
Right.
We need to prioritize clear and accurate communication, especially during emergencies.
Absolutely.
And we need to invest in infrastructure and building codes that can withstand the force of these storms.
But it's not just about physical preparedness, is it?
No, it's not.
It's also about having a culture of preparedness.
Right.
Where individuals and communities understand the risks and are empowered to take action.
You're absolutely right. It's about having emergency plans.
Okay.
Knowing evacuation routes, having supplies on hand. It's about being aware of the potential dangers.
Right.
And being prepared to act decisively when a hurricane threatens.
Because as we've seen with both the Galveston Hurricane and Hurricane Milton, these storms can be incredibly destructive.
They can.
But by understanding the lessons of the past and taking proactive steps to prepare, we can mitigate the risk and build more resilient communities.
Exactly. The Galveston Hurricane is a stark reminder of what can happen when we underestimate the power of nature.
It is.
But it's also a testament to the human spirit's ability to overcome adversity and rebuild.
Right.
And as we face the challenges of climate change and the increasing intensity of hurricanes, that spirit of resilience, that commitment to preparedness is more important than ever.
Well said. And as we wrap up this deep dive, I encourage you to learn more about the Galveston Hurricane and to explore the resources available for hurricane preparedness in your own community.
It's a good reminder for all of us.
Because as we've learned, knowledge is power and preparation can truly make a difference when a storm approaches.